Welcome to The Second Opinion. My name is Dr. Eric Tam, and I am a board-certified family physician here at Mighty Health. Our goal is to have inclusive and holistic conversations, all things related to healthy living. Today, I think we have a really interesting topic to discuss that I truly believe has an impact on so many people these past few years, and that's this concept of loneliness, and particularly its effects on your health. Just out of curiosity, Maggie, jumping in, when you hear the term loneliness, what do you think of?
Lots of different things. I think that prior to a few years ago, we weren't really talking about loneliness, and so I would just kind of think of it as a general term, but now that we know there's so many important health risks associated with it, it almost sort of sends up some red flags in my mind of, oh, this is a really important health issue, not just sort of a general term or an emotion that we feel sometimes.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. So I want to read you a few things because I found it quite interesting. So the American Heart Association recently published a statement summarizing the evidence for direct association between social isolation, loneliness, and coronary heart disease and stroke mortality. In addition to that, there's been countless studies that have shown people experiencing social isolation and loneliness to have an increased risk for anxiety and depression and dementia. So in some ways, this concept of loneliness makes sense to us as, doctors, in that it's not good for you, but to really see the data and to see these statements was really quite shocking to me.
Yes, I think that in theory it makes sense. Okay, there should be, it's probably not great for you to feel lonely or to feel socially isolated, but to have all that data to back it up and to have all these major medical societies, to have the Surgeon General write a whole book about loneliness.
Yeah, and I think too, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but I think just growing up in, really in my household and my cultural background, I've seen loneliness to be such a big factor in the aging population from the standpoint of, culturally, so many people just give and give to their children that when they reach a older age, it's often now when they're finding this new identity crisis and this new environment of loneliness because their children may have left the homes and things of that nature. And I feel like that's been one of the biggest challenges for a lot of the patients that I take care of. We have this sense of purpose as a parent, as a professional, and then when some of that, those roles subsides, it's like, oh man, what is left? Have you encountered kind of those types of scenarios? And if so, how do you kind of think through those to help your patients with it?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I have encountered those situations. I liked what you said about there's sort of a thing in our culture where there's these expected roles we play out, and then there's a reason why there's such thing as empty nest syndrome, or we talk about it like it's a real thing, because there's a real loss. There's maybe even a grief process that happens as you lose some of those roles that you were playing, and our society, our culture doesn't really prepare people very well for what happens next, because you ideally still have a lot of life to live and a lot of years left, but how do you spend those years and how can you actually optimize your health in the meantime? It's not really something that we talk about very much.
Yeah, I mean, right now I spend so much time with the geriatric population, and like the secret sauce or the secret recipe to just thrive later in age is quite clear. And to me, the recurring theme is actually staying busy. I've had 80-some-year-olds that tell me, oh, Dr. Tam, I'm still going to work. And I was like, what? I can't wait to retire. But so many of them, reiterate, oh, that's when things go downhill. The key is to always keep working. And I think the reason for that is, one, you still have a sense of purpose, but more so you have a schedule. It keeps you out of the house. It keeps you interacting with others. The second you're just at home hanging around, it's so easy to sit on the couch and watch TV all the time. And one thing I think a lot about is what type of resources I can offer my patients in terms of, regaining some of that social circle that they may have lost, or how they can be more active. Curious to just hear your thoughts on how you approach that.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about resources. I also just want to reframe or sort of add a spin to what you just said, because do we think all 80-year-olds should be full-time working in their employed position? Maybe, maybe not. It depends how strenuous it is and, their financial situation, everything else. But another way to think about it, aside from staying busy, is also stay connected. That's another sort of framework to use. So you don't have to be working at your job, but are you involved in something else? Are you really well connected to your family? Are you volunteering? That serves the same purpose as, keeping you busy and having a schedule, but maybe with a little bit less of the obligation or pressure of working your fully employed job into your 80s. So that's another way to think about it for our viewers. And yeah, resources. So what I just kind of mentioned follows into that. We've already established that there are a lot of real health risk factors to experiencing loneliness or experiencing social isolation. We recommend that you focus on diet and exercise, and we recommend you take certain medications if they're indicated. So kind of putting that on your to-do list of how am I going to stay socially connected should be just right up there with all the other things and interventions we talk about. Most of our clinics that we work in or health systems we work in, even your health insurance maybe, might have access to a social worker. They're a really great first step. Social worker, AARP, community organizations, all these people have a wealth of information if you're looking for ways to stay connected. Service to others is a really great way to put to use all the skills that you have potentially as an older adult. And again, without some of the obligation of working in a job, I think that thinking about volunteering or serving your community in some way or another would give you both a lot of social connection. A lot of my patients find so much value in that.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I think sometimes people struggle with just getting started. And I think one place that I've seen to be super helpful is actually your local recreation center. I was just blown away by just seeing how many services they offer, different types of classes they offer. In terms of just kind of, when a patient that you're meeting for the first time, how much do you prioritize that social aspect of their health? I think you and I are pretty similar in this way, but just want to hear how you go about it out loud.
I think for us, so we're both family physicians, which means we really care about someone's context. That's probably one of the most important parts of learning about a patient, so we can figure out how to provide them the best care and figure out what's going to work best for them. So I think when I'm meeting a new patient, you probably do the same. We always ask a little bit more about your living situation, your family, what are you interested in, that kind of thing. An important distinction we haven't gone over too much yet is there's a difference between being alone and feeling lonely. So there may be many times at which we're alone, we're quite happy to be alone, we're really enjoying our time. People who identify as introverts might enjoy it even more or need more of that time. But once you get to the point where you feel like you don't have someone you could confide in, or you're feeling more alone than you would like to feel, or missing out on social connections that you wish you had, that's when we're getting into the isolation and loneliness. So I don't actually ask it spot on. Maybe I should. Maybe that's something we should all be thinking about to do. One thing I will point out is if any folks have had an annual wellness visit before, one of the questions you have to ask when you're heading into that visit is, do you have someone that you trust? Do you have someone you could confide in or you could call in case of an emergency? And that's a screening for loneliness too. So it's kind of happening, we're kind of coming at it from all these roundabout ways, but we probably could do better to ask more directly too.
Yeah, I want to first just touch on that piece of you can be alone but not lonely. And I think that's so important too, because some people don't yearn for that social connection the same way that others do. And I think that's an amazing point to be in. I think I'm more on the introvert side. Many friends and family don't believe it, but I just love that alone time too. And I think a lot of people are in that place in their life. And I think that's amazing. I recently had, a patient case where, I'm taking care of this mom and daughter who are currently living at a transitional housing shelter. And when I first met her, she had so many different medical symptoms, concerns. And when I was able to dig down a little bit deeper into their living situation to find out that they're staying in this transitional housing and shelter where they don't feel safe every night, then you start to realize, whoa, like that's actually where all their medical symptoms are coming from. And they're really out there just them two against the world in some ways. And that is their, element of social isolation and loneliness and all the anxiety, stresses that come with it.
For sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Eric, something I wanted to ask you is if you've had any examples or sort of more success stories in working with patients where folks have been able to find that social connection.
Yeah, I know I just kind of told a very not depressing, but just a more serious case of social isolation and loneliness. I've actually seen the reverse where just being, as a provider, even being that constant presence of social support has made a huge difference. I have similar patients where the only consistent person that they saw in their life was me as their doctor. Knowing that they had this person they could rely on, be there and support them, I think that made a big difference in just feeling like they didn't have to go at it alone. So I think that has been, a huge privilege as just a doctor, being able to provide that type of support. And sometimes I find those the most beautiful of patient visits, in that it doesn't require prescribing any medications. It doesn't require any referrals to specialists, but it just requires sitting down and just listening.
I think that's such a great, it's a great example and story to tell too. And I really appreciate that you kind of stepped in and provided some of that stability for the patient. It's important to remember, we're primary care physicians, we're not therapists, we're not trained as therapists. However, we can help to address these issues, and we can help to address social isolation because we know it's such an important health risk factor. I also think what you said is so important, that, and heading into a doctor's visit, it doesn't always have to be about obtaining medication or getting testing of some kind. The relationship and building that relationship and having that stability, that's therapeutic in and of itself. Sometimes patients will actually come to us frequently and they won't be able to say that they feel alone or isolated. There will be specific, symptoms that they're bringing up, but as we continue to work together over time in that continuity, we can start to pick up on, oh, that's actually what's going on underneath all this. And then we can really start to connect them to that social worker that we mentioned earlier, or connect them to some of the community resources you mentioned, the local rec center. All those things are super helpful too.
Absolutely. And I agree, like what you just mentioned, of sometimes it's hard to recognize the symptoms that you're feeling and also what's the root cause of them. I've had so many folks where they've been debilitated with symptoms of anxiety that is actually rooted in just being alone, right? Just fear of being alone, fear of not having someone around if their health were to further decline. And it was oftentimes not recognized until it was really called out, during the visit, where it's like, hey, I've noticed since, your kids actually left the house and the recent passing of your husband, that all these symptoms developed. And then just breaking that down. One thing we get asked a lot by our viewers is just on this idea of how do we make friends when we get older, particularly 50 and above. Is it normal to lose friends as we get older? And really, why is it so hard to make friends when we get older? What are your thoughts on those questions, Maggie? And I'm happy to provide mine as well too.
It's such a good question, really. And I think, you could really ask it at any age. Once you get out of school age, I think a lot of people in their 30s and 40s nowadays, and with everything that's happened with the pandemic, are asking the same question of, why is it so hard to make friends as an adult of any age? I think part of the problem here is that the way our society is structured is that there's these natural points where you make friends, right? In grade school, in high school, potentially in college. But beyond that, there isn't really a natural way to make it happen. What does that mean? It means, unfortunately, you have to make it happen for yourself, and you have to actually step in and be a bit more proactive in fostering those relationships. Again, like we were talking about earlier, knowing that it's not just for a random reason, it's truly for your health and reducing that risk factor of social isolation. So we agree with everybody, it is really hard, but it can be fixed and it can be remedied if you're a little bit more proactive. It is going to be more so through your interests, and like any health change, I'd really recommend starting really small, teeny tiny, not making some huge life transformation, but saying, I'm going to go to, I'm interested in crocheting. I'm going to go to one crochet class and go check it out and just see who I meet there. I'm going to go to 2 crochet classes and just feel it out. It makes a lot of sense to start with something you're interested in, and then also just starting small. And I've seen a lot of my patients have really great success just kind of stepping out in that way a little bit, but it does take that activation energy and them being proactive with it. What do you think? How's it been working?
Yeah. No, I love this idea of starting small, because I'm just thinking, my goodness, the social anxiety that probably comes with this process. Like even for myself now, the thought of trying to make new friends, getting out of your comfort zone, it's not easy. So in some ways, I think to start that journey of putting yourself out there, making new friends, it almost just starts with first realigning and re-understanding who you are and who you're looking to find and kind of share your time with. And I think one thing that I've noticed with my patient population of this age is a lot of them actually haven't been able to have the time to rediscover who they are in this next chapter. And a lot of them have actually been interested in speaking with a therapist, and that they have had a lot of situations they haven't had time to process yet. What can make things easier is just understanding what you're needing in this chapter, what your values are. And then naturally, I think you'll be able to track that once you have a good understanding of it.
Exactly, yeah. What I'm hearing you say is rather than forcing yourself or jumping right into trying to fix a problem or do something like that, to really take a pause and to say, once you've identified that maybe you're a little more isolated than you'd like to be, you're feeling a little more loneliness than before, pausing and reflecting on that. And like you said, figure out, who do I want to be? Who am I in this moment? What am I looking for? And also, like you mentioned, and I'm sure we'll recommend many times, is actually to use the support of a professional therapist to help you work through some of those issues. Therapists are absolutely trained to help people work through social isolation and loneliness. You don't have to be in acute mental health crisis, but that's something that they could really help with too. So I really like that idea as well.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that I've been trying to prioritize in my own life too is maintaining the friends that we currently have, so that by the time you're 60 or 70, you're not thinking, oh, like I wonder like what's Maggie been up to? I haven't seen her in like 3 decades. Rather, it could just be, oh, I wonder what Maggie's up to. Let me just give her a call. She's probably not busy or something. And so I think that's so important. Is just focusing on yourself to build new relationships, but also constantly throughout your life making that conscious effort to hold on to and maintain and foster those relationships that mean a lot to you.
Oh, that's so true. That's such a good point. We're mostly focusing about new connections and how to build your connections out a little bit more, but that's just very real that we've had many friends in our life and many, relationships with other people, and it's worth doing as part of that assessment and sort of figuring out what you want to do to assess what's my current network. And another thing about our culture is that we have a vibe of don't want to bother people. So, I'm thinking about them, but I'm not going to reach out. But I think that something that would really help this overall, what the Surgeon General calls as an epidemic of loneliness, something that would help on a community level, is to take that step and to reach out to someone. And you never know, you might be reaching them at a very important time, or they might also be feeling quite isolated, and you may be actually making their life a lot better by connecting with them.
Absolutely. And this idea of just taking that first step and not wanting to bother someone, I think about that all the time. Yeah. But what I've also thought a lot about is how much time we have when we're stuck in LA traffic, and how many friends we could be reconnecting with. No, I think the power of technology these days has really made social connection easier, and it'd be a waste for us to not use it. I think a lot about just a simple phone call, a simple FaceTime, to just reconnect with someone that may be thinking the same about you, and you'd be surprised if you and wouldn't know it if you never made that call. So I think for the people out there that are looking for connection and have someone in mind that they've been thinking about and wondering about, I think a phone call can be life-changing. So just a push for people to really put themselves out there in that way, where it's as simple as a phone call and reconnecting with someone that you really care about. So putting that step forward and just going for it.
What you just mentioned, it really it reminds me that social connection doesn't have some prescribed amount of minutes. When we tell people to exercise, we think it should be a certain number of moderate aerobic activity for this number of minutes, is proven in the studies that that's important for our health. But with the social connection, it doesn't have to be this long phone call that goes on for hours and hours. Just the quick, 5 to 10 minutes, just saying hi, just checking on you, that can make a world of difference. So we keep saying it over and over again, but the starting small can also apply to a short conversation, just saying hello, a short conversation you have with somebody at the grocery store. Building those connections can just be very brief and random and small, and that's probably going to make it more doable too.
Yeah, and just to that point of, sometimes I found the briefest conversations to be the most powerful. Sometimes just running into a random stranger and them being super excited to say hello in the morning can be life-changing sometimes. So I think I think a lot about even those little conversations, those little quotes, those little snippets, particularly as a doctor too, right? So much of what we say, I think our patients do take to heart. And so those little conversations can make a huge difference. So it's making sure we're open to having them and putting ourselves out there to have them. So it's not about the duration of spending time, but to your point, it's just, having them, having that interaction, having those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. So loneliness and social isolation, probably the most important part is just to recognize it and to know that we as your doctor think it's really important, and it unfortunately has a lot of health risks. Probably the biggest statistic that hit home for me was when I read that having higher degrees of social isolation and loneliness increases your risk of death from any cause. So if that can sort of land with folks who are watching this and think about, okay, well, I really need to take action on this for my health, that's something just to even sort of have that awareness that you need to act on it, and this is very important for your health. Just in the same way that we think about screening for diabetes and talking about smoking and all those things, it's all on the same level of importance. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We as family physicians, as primary care doctors, we know this is so important. We want to help you with it. We might not always ask about it directly, but we would love to help you address it because we know it's so important for your health.
Yeah, I think my mighty takeaways for this segment on loneliness is one, loneliness is a real health concern. We know based off of studies that there are direct health impacts. So just like you said, Maggie, we got to see loneliness just as we see high blood pressure, diabetes. Two, I think, I really, really want to make a push to empower our patients to talk to their doctors about it, just as they talk to them about their medical conditions. And every doctor should care about that and should be thinking about ways to address it. And three, I think I'll probably, similar to you, it's all about starting small, but it's all about getting yourself in a place where making new connections feels comfortable, feels right, and also prioritizing yourself to find those hobbies that you used to enjoy and getting back into them and finding people to do it with you. And before you know it, you might have an entire network waiting to do those hobbies with you, and you might actually want to start staying at home because you're going out and hanging out too much.